I'm Mark Hennick. This is So-Called Normal. Hey folks, welcome to So-Called Normal. I'm Mark Hennick. Today on the show we have Dr. Bill Howatt. Bill is the Chief of Research for Workforce Productivity for the Conference Board of Canada and the President of Howatt HR Consulting. I wanted to have Bill in to chat about workplace mental health in particular, and we've had a couple of guests on the show so far to do this because it's an area where there's so much exploration. I mean, people spend more waking hours at work than pretty much anywhere else in their lives. So if mental health is going to intersect with anything, it's our jobs and our what we do with our lives every day. That said, and we did a lot of that, but the conversation really went in some interesting directions that I think you're going to really enjoy. We went into personal places and explored psychology in a way that I haven't with many other guests. So I really enjoyed my conversation with Bill. We followed each other on social and elsewhere for quite a long time, but this is the first time that we actually met in person. And we hit it off like old friends, I think. So here's my conversation with Dr. Bill Howatt on So-Called Normal.
How did I get into mental health and what led me to this journey? What's kind of interesting is that you and I do share some stuff besides being from Nova Scotia. We both have a background in mental health, but I look at it three different elements. One is someone who has personal life experience. So I'm the kid that was in a foster home for my first few years and then was adopted. Went to Prince Edward Island. I'm the kid who failed grade 2 and went through that process of social isolation and watching everyone go ahead of you and processing what that was like. I was a kid that didn't think they had enough self-confidence and they couldn't believe in themselves and didn't know what anxiety and depression was at that point in time. I went through that, just thought I was stupid and dumb. And I got through it, but I had good mentors. It was interesting, like Mrs. Stewart in grade, 5, we wrote a book called Our Trips to Warren Grove. I said, maybe I could learn. So I started to see that. But I went through the public education system, and then when I got to Acadia University, where I was a fairly big kid, and I was a pretty good football player, and I got recruited. And when I got to Acadia, it was interesting. I was there for about 2 weeks, made the team, and one particular professor came up to me and said to me, Bill, how did you get to Acadia? I said, by bus. And she kind of said, no, I mean, how did you get here? You know what I mean? Like I go, I got there because I guess I'm a pretty good athlete, and my marks were, I guess, suspect, probably not the hottest marks in the world. I did okay to get into university. But anyway, she said to me, it was really neat. She said to me, this is where I started to realize the power of accommodation and starting to realize what was going on with me. That was my genesis for my self-discovery because she said, well, I'm pretty sure you have visual dyslexia and auditory dyslexia, and I know you're ADHD. That's quite sure because your mind, the way you jump around.
But nobody had diagnosed you.
No, I was my mom had an idea that I might have a learning disability, but we didn't have the same. In the 1970s, it wasn't a whole lot of sophistication.
Sure.
What
was your mom's background? What did she do?
My mom was a stay-home mom.
Okay.
And my father was a bartender. So they were the most influential role models and my best role models I had in my life. Dad gave me values. Mom gave me hard work. And together, it was kind of neat. So what happened to me, Mark, was when I went through that experience, a light went on for me and I realized, hey, this kind of process that I can be different but can fit in. So this particular professor was basically said, I'm going to help you. And she did, and she stuck to her word. And then I graduated from Acadia, my first degree, and I could realize, wow, I could learn, I could read, I have accommodations. Then I started to deal with football, really helped me with my self-confidence, self-esteem, and because I had never really dated much, I haven't been around people, I just thought I was dumb and stupid. And that journey got me really interested in young people. So my first job when I graduated from Acadia, as I started with young offenders, and I realized when I was working with them, is that those kids had a lot of background in addiction and abuse and et cetera. And that personal experience of knowing that they didn't need someone talking at them. They needed someone to start talking with them. That really got me passionate about, this thing about mental health. I have some personal experience. I didn't really know what the heck it was. Now I wanted to start to learn everything I could about it. So that got me on a mission to do my doctorate work and start seeing clients and started seeing patients. And so then all of a sudden now I have that lived experience. Then I'm seeing people. I have that personal experience. Yeah. And then what happened to me is, I don't know if you've heard this one before, but when you start seeing patients one at a time, and I've done it for years, and you see 6, 7 people at a time, and it's really gratifying work. But when you start realizing it's a big problem. And I started to realize that a lot of these folks, what's happening to them was their experience in the workplace. A lot of folks were coming who were having challenges from the workplace. And I said, okay, this is a really big anthill, and this is a big problem. Before we were really even talking about the big mental health crisis.
Right. How long ago was this?
25 years ago.
Wow, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I started to identify it. So then I went off to start and wanted to teach in the university and college and started to develop programs and start teaching and started to focus on counseling behavior. And then I realized that the big one for me was to start to get involved in corporations, start working in corporations. I went to New York for 12 years, spent 12 years on Wall Street, did a bunch of different roles. And I had some experience in starting to realize that even in Wall Street, it's fairly competitive if you've never been involved in that world. But empathy and teaching people skills and kindness, all the basic counseling skills was one of the reasons why I was able to thrive.
Right.
What was fascinating is having the management hat on and facilitating that. But the reality is knowing enough about how to develop relationships with people. It's just started to get my thesis, Mark. A lot of what we can do in organizations, that the concept about mental health versus mental illness, being someone who spends a lot of time dealing with people over the years with mental illness, and by the way, addiction is a mental illness. We keep forgetting that sometimes in our conversations, as I'm sure you here know as well, is that those people that have those issues, not all of them are biological.
Right.
Right? I try to equate it to people who think about it as like your genetic potential, right? 50% of your happiness is your genetics, and probably 50% of all mental illnesses are genetic. Like there's only a small percentage of the ones I've seen that are bipolar and schizophrenia. The majority are addiction, depression, and anxiety.
Almost the common colds of mental illnesses, right?
Exactly. And then, so what I find with these, what I started to realize is that if I could start to get a frame of reference to understand that if I started to work with patients, I started to realize there's a whole lot of similarities to chronic disease. And what I mean by that is this. When you think about physical exercise, people go, why do you do it? That's for my physical health. So most human beings in Canada know what the algorithm is for physical health. They know it's exercise, diet, rest, relaxation, good social connections, because they'll be your role models. If you follow those, you usually can do pretty good. But it's interesting, having that knowledge alone is not enough, because if you look around in Canada, we just got a D in our participation award. I'm sure you were at that. Obesity is a big challenge in Canada. And we started to have those challenges. What I started to realize is that we start to look at mental health. I started to realize when I was working with patients, came to me with a mental illness, I started to realize that sometimes folks, through their lifestyle choices, didn't realize they were doing the best they could with what they know, but their lifestyle choices were making them ill.
Right. And sometimes, actually, not uncommonly, their lifestyle isn't necessarily their choice per se, if they're poor, if they're homeless.
Absolutely.
There's other factors.
So absolutely. The socioeconomical stuff, we know that's important as well. And if I step back and I thought about it, and I started to see that what I realized is these folks were coming in with treatment issues. What we were really doing is once we got them through their high symptom load and ameliorated symptom load, what we were really doing for their quality of life was to start to teach them how to live with mental health.
Right.
How to develop different thinking skills, different micro skills. And that really got me thinking a lot about the difference between mental health and mental illness.
Sure.
They're really on two different axes.
Now, when you, in your clinical experience and personal experience for that matter, once you're able to stabilize the symptoms of the mental illness, I think one of the traps that people fall into, the miracle of modern medicine, I guess, right? They get on medication or a really great therapist, and it helps with those symptoms. And then I think there's a temptation to think, okay, I'm done. And maybe even, okay, I can come off the medication or stop doing the thing that helped me get better in the first place. But if you're not doing that other underlying work, if you're not doing the work, as is said in the field, the wheels can fall off pretty quickly.
Absolutely. The same thing as, for example, someone that's chronically depressed with, and has a really strong depression. Those folks can get symptom relief, but they're just like a diabetic. They still have depression. But if they, to your point, if they change their lifestyle choices and they don't pay attention to what got them healthy and maintain their health, they are at risk. The challenge is for folks, and this is where our big problem is, and that's why I'm so happy what you're doing and you're helping to create these conversations around removing stigma, is here's the big issue. The reality is everybody has mental health. And if you think about the average Canadian workforce today or the average Canadian, you start realizing what's going on. 20% of the population has a mental health issue. 30 to 40% of the population is lonely. 19% of the population is having an issue with heavy drinking. You start thinking about financial health in our country. Is that I was listening to Excellence Canada the other day, and they were saying that a stat which you can imagine, 30 minutes a day the average Canadian spends worried about money. So the bottom line is who doesn't have something they're worried about? Elder care, parenting, child, marriage, 50% of people get separated, divorced.
So I was raised, we were saying before we came on air, I was raised in Cape Breton, Irish Catholic. So you learn pretty quickly life is hard.
Yeah, well, you do.
And harder for some. Right?
Yeah, it absolutely is, I think, Mark. And I think that's what the point is that when I step back and start thinking about it, the more we can start doing up front to start educating people what mental health is. But I'd be interested about, if I came up to you and said, Mark, what's the algorithm for mental health?
Right, yeah.
Right.
And even as somebody who's been in the field and has had a diagnosis of a mental illness now for almost 20 years, I'm not sure that even I can fully nail that down yet, right? I know what works for me. And I think over that 20 years, I've gotten very good at depression because you learn to recognize your signs, when you're decompensating, what you need to do to get back in place. But I'm also very privileged in that respect, in that not everybody is able to get to that kind of meta level where they're able to analyze themselves in that way.
Well, however, what I think the key for you is you became a student of yourself.
Absolutely.
And if everyone learns that, but the fact is, that's why meditation's not for everybody.
Right.
That's why mindfulness is not for everybody.
And nor, though, does it mean, because I've heard criticisms from other prominent mental health advocates, nor does it mean that it's not for anybody, right? It does work for some people.
Oh, absolutely.
Just like medication or whatever else.
Absolutely. That's what I guess, and I appreciate your point. I think that's the point. I do a lot of writing in the Globe and Mail. I create these things called micro skills. And the reason I created them is because of my belief system is that we need to figure out what works for us.
Right.
So, for example, if I have issues with sleep, and sleep hygiene's an issue, then what are the things that I do that can help? And through my micro decisions and learning micro skills, I can start to change. But the reality is we have to somewhat become a student and start to experiment with different options and start to kind of see what's possible for ourselves and what doesn't work for us. And a lot of that, I think, is I kind of get people to say, okay, how do you start? And I say step one is awareness. The majority of people with a mental health issue or have a mental illness don't know they have one. Right.
Or they'll actively deny it.
Absolutely. The people who are in pattern behaviors like addictive disorders, they'll have lots of denial because sometimes they actually know because they're going through physiology symptoms.
Right.
But, someone who was dysthymia, this low-grade depression, like that rock in the shoe,
Yeah, or
they
that
just
wet blanket on you all the time.
Yeah, they just get used to, they think that's just their normal. It's like the person puts 75 pounds on, they go, hey, this is me for the rest of my life.
You get used to it. It's like, again, I don't know why I'm bringing Cape Breton up so much, maybe because we're fellow Nova Scotians, but if you cook a lobster in cold water, it'll suffer longer as the water heats up because it acclimates to the water, right? And I think of that all the time that, if you encounter a trauma, an acute trauma, then it might be very obvious very quickly that you're struggling. And everybody seems to understand, that person's struggling because they went to war or because they're in an accident or robbed or whatever. But people don't always realize that when you've encountered a lot of adverse childhood experiences or complex or intergenerational trauma, that's a lot more difficult to unravel, right? Because it has taken place over the course of your lifetime.
Right.
So how then do you how do you help people gain insight when they're not necessarily at that point yet where they're able to acknowledge that they're struggling?
It's actually a good point, a good question. I think one of the big challenges is how do they actually, where's their awareness come from? So sometimes people will just start to realize themselves, it's kind of like, I have things aren't right, and they start talking to someone and they get educated about what the options are, and they say, well, maybe you need to talk to someone who specializes, and go talk to my GP, or I'll go talk to someone. So
the proverbial breaking point or rock bottom or whatever it is, or moment of change.
And it's somewhere like I don't quite know who to talk to or how to go to it. What people keep forgetting is when a person is having that experience, they're spending a lot of time in their emotions.
Sure.
And when you're caught in your emotions, almost like a switch that flips. Like if I go from my broker's region over here to my emotion region, I don't think the same here as I do here. So I can't actually overhear when I kind of switch flips. I kind of try to explain to people like this, like road rage, right? You're driving down the road and someone cuts you off and you're here. And you go, someone just cut me off, and your brain flips and go, oh, I should run the bastard over. And then you go back up and go, that's not a good idea.
Right.
And then you go back down here and say, I'll give him a finger. And you go back up here and you say, no, that's not good. So we're going back and forth between this. And those automatic thoughts, when you get stuck here, and from your experience, the same thing with suicide ideation. You get over here, you start actually believing it.
And that's exactly the example I used in the TED Talk, and I talk about this all the time too, that's normal to switch back and forth and all this, but then you probably get to your office or home or whatever, and a few hours later, forget about that guy who cut you off entirely. That's how, quote unquote, normal people operate. When it becomes a problem, however, and what I've experienced over and over, is when you get stuck in that other place and you can't get yourself out.
Right, and that's frequency, duration, intensity. So your point, when a person gets caught here, the challenge is not what we want to teach people. The first thing is, just because you don't know the answers doesn't mean that they're not possible.
Right.
So when we're doing our stigma campaigns, we need to start educating people. Just because you don't know the answer doesn't mean there's not a possible one.
And this actually really bothers me when people in the public space say that depression, for example, is incurable, that there is no cure.
No, I disagree with that.
I completely disagree with it myself too. It's that maybe we haven't found a cure, whatever that even means, quote unquote, a cure yet, or maybe just for that individual person at that time, they haven't connected with the right type of help.
But these are all mental, all these are functional, as you know.
Absolutely. So what does even cure mean?
Exactly. So it's the degree of functionality. Right. So for example, yourself, for someone who lives with chronic depression, you seem today to be creating an illusion of high functioning. So what happens is that most of us, the same thing with myself, living with a mental health issue around anxiety, is I seem to create the illusion I have it together most times.
Right.
But being ADHD is my mind can jump and different things you can move around. And what we have to actually understand, what we're not spending enough time, is understanding, I think, Mark, is around what's called emotional flus. And so when you start thinking about it, for example, you could be throwing up for 3 or 4 days, really, really hard, physically sick, and someone goes, that's a virus. But no one would think twice once that virus is over, you can't go back to work.
Right. Yeah.
We don't have parodies, but you could be emotionally down 3 or 4 days and someone looks and goes, ooh, that's not good.
Yeah.
And what I've seen over 30 plus years of doing this, if I had a camera in people's houses and watched the people are somewhat judgmental of other human beings, they lose their cookies a lot. And they would, if someone was watching them, they would go, wow, that person's off the charts, upset. But they'll go out of their office to their house and go back and create the illusion they're perfectly fine like the rest of us.
Right.
And what we don't have enough empathy yet to understand that we can, as human beings, do this. And when we get caught in emotions and we get stuck in it, that doesn't have anything to do with our competencies.
Right. So why do you think people do that? Why do we have to learn to be such good actors when we're emotionally vulnerable and raw in that way?
I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I just think it's where our society, for whatever happened from generations, where we, because of hierarchies, we're told not to complain. And you start thinking about my father when he's a traditionalist, and if you're me growing up in Prince Edward Island, you in Cape Breton, you would know when your father said dinner's at 5, it's not optional.
Right.
It's at 5, and you're there at 5, and you eat what's on your plate, and you do what you're told.
And you eat every bit of it.
Every bit of it, right? Or you sit there till 8 o'clock at night looking at your food. And so what happens is that traditional hierarchy one, but it almost became where people were told, because food and scarcity, we're at a point now where we have so much abundance. But if I look back at the depression wasn't that many years ago for you and I, really. I mean, we may not have been born, but think about the impact on our parents.
Sure. Yeah. Relatively speaking, only a couple generations.
Right. And so what's happening is the scarcity mentality was for a long time. There was 2 major wars, and we start to come now. We're in a society where there's so much abundance now. But what I think is happening is that part where we're just starting to realize that emotions are okay and that people are emotional. You can't separate your cognition and your emotions, like your emotions are your flavor and food.
Yeah.
And I think we're just starting to realize what happens between your ears. If I hit someone in their arm, they can get a bruise.
Right.
But if I keep hitting them, that'll hurt. The same things with, for example, respectful workplace violations, bullying that's happening, occupational health and safety changes. We're starting to realize, mental injuries happen.
Yeah.
You don't need to have a mental illness to have a mental injury.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you can get better.
I want to come back to this idea that you just mentioned around scarcity mentality, because I've been writing about this recently for my book, and this idea that I think it's connected to the idea of why we have to hide, or why we feel like we have to hide our struggle from others. And I think that the psychology of it maybe is that if we make other people uncomfortable, or if we feel like we make other people uncomfortable, they might not want to be around us anymore. And real, authentic human connection is so scarce, and it's what we actually want the most as isolated, depressed, or anxious people.
You're right.
That's our biggest fear. If I make them think I'm weird, they're going to leave me, and that's what I don't want. So I have to act normal so they don't leave me.
And I think I think you're on the right track. And I mean, I don't know if I'll get to fully realize and to articulate what you're thinking around the scarcity mentality, but I think the social isolation piece.
Right.
I'm leading a study with the Canadian Mental Health Commission of Ontario, and one of the things we're doing is looking at the impact of loneliness in the workplace.
Right.
And I think if you think about it, the research actually for millennials is that they'll actually put loneliness more something they're more fearful of than losing their job.
Sure.
Right? And so that whole concept of social acceptance, but it's interesting in your peer groups. And that's why I really believe that with managers who actually create a resilient organization, it's not just the employees that are resilient, it's also the manager, how they have their words with the employees, how they check in. They don't have to actually, every time they talk to you, it's not about what you need to do for me. It's just say, how you doing today? How can I help you today? There are things I can do so that we can
relationship building.
It's all about
connection building.
It's about building authentic connections, as you said. Yeah. And that's the genesis of my belief system for reducing a lot of the mental health issues, because human beings, if you think about little programs like AA, why did they work?
Right.
People helping people, people believing in people.
Or even faith communities or other kind of connection-based places.
Right. And I think what's happening is the challenge is, this technology, and it'd be interesting what you think about that, is the technology is that people are getting so much connection and think they're so isolated. They sit there and they're on their phones for hours and hours out. But there's a paradox here. And it's really interesting. The busier they get on it, they start to lose their own capacity to socially interact with other people.
Yeah, and then I don't think it's a coincidence we see higher rates of social media use linked with higher rates of depression and anxiety.
Yes.
Right, and I think part of that is because it's reinforcing that persona, right? You're not seeing social media or Facebook pictures of people at funerals or people staying in bed all day in the bathroom, because people don't want people to see that part of their life.
Yeah.
So they're posting the smiling pictures on the beach, and then I think it's self-reinforcing for others in terms of this idea of FOMO, fear of missing out. Everybody thinks that everybody else is having a great life, right? And nobody really, we present the best of ourselves out there.
When you're talking to all the people, Mark, I'd be interested, where do you think we are in the stigma continuum? Like if 0 is we're really, really not doing a good job and 10 is utopia, where do you think we're at?
I don't think we're doing as well as we think we are.
Good.
And by that, I mean, I think that there's been a big uptick in awareness in the last 10 years. In part, the work that Bell Let's Talk has been doing in Canada has really, I think, made a difference in general level awareness.
I would agree.
Now, that said, however, anybody who looks at all the glossy fundraising brochures for psychiatric hospitals and all that kind of stuff, I would challenge them to go visit a psychiatric hospital. One of the ones that are pretty much everywhere in Canada, not one of the nice, newly designed, cleaned up ones. They're not always the most progressive, warm, friendly places, right? And especially if you're in a small town without a whole lot of services, or that still have, the bars and the cages and,
the Butterscotch Palace.
The Butterscotch Palace, as it was known in Nova Scotia. So these places aren't the most conducive to recovery from a recovery-oriented system. So I think in that respect, and actually also there are certain mental illnesses that are still, we haven't cracked the nut on. I think suicide I still consider as an offshoot of mental illness. I think that's still people don't understand that, and they're still afraid to talk about it. Bipolar disorder, psychosis in particular. So I think there are some that we haven't come.
Well, this edibles is going to be a big challenge for increased psychosis. A lot of people don't realize is that with the THC levels, when people start, digesting over 30, 40, 50, 60 milligrams, what they don't realize is there are actually three elements that's important. One is your physical size, stature will play a role in your other conditions. Your mental state will play a big issue. And your history of using will be an issue around any levels of tolerance. And I think what you're going to find is like those policemen that were experimenting in Toronto, and they had a chocolate bar, and they ended up. My experience with psychosis, and you've probably seen some of this from your own experience and others, is that a lot of people end up in trees and other things that are quite odd. But I agree with that. Is that there's going to be more for young people. I'm particularly worried about this, and I'm spending time talking and educating employers about it. I think suicide too. You bring up a good point. It's interesting. We're still not talking about it enough. I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, there's 11 people die every day in Canada, and between 200 and 250. There's every 10 seconds someone takes their life on the planet. And so you start thinking about the magnitude of why. And my belief system, after being a practitioner, I've dealt with people who shot themselves in the face and all kinds of stuff that have the after fact go, wow, I'm glad I'm still here.
Right.
But a lot of it is we haven't yet taught people the basics of how they manage their emotions.
Right. And I think that we fall down that trap of that social isolation becomes internalized, and then it almost takes on a self-reinforcing pattern of its own, that then we collapse into ourselves and we isolate
But
ourselves.
What's a more important competency, Mark? Let's see, 2 + 2 is 4. We need math for something. We need reading and writing for something. I'm still perplexed why the concept of how to be a happy human being is not in our curriculum from day one.
Or even how to manage our emotions. Like everybody knows that people are born feeling emotions. That's always been the case. But we're never, and I could certainly say I've never been actually formally taught, well, this is what anger feels like and this is how you deal with it. Or this is what sadness feels like. And these are the quote unquote normal things that can be helpful, right? We don't get those kinds of skills, even though those kinds of skills do exist. Therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. That should not be something accessible only when people are very sick and administered necessarily as a treatment. That's basic life skills that everybody should have within a cognitive behavioral therapy.
I agree. That's one of the reasons why I created programs like Pathway to Coping, et cetera, is to get these skills upstream. I'm convinced a lot of people don't have the basic micro skills that will help them live a happy, healthy, productive life.
Well, and then we wonder why we haven't really cracked the suicide nut yet either, why suicide rates aren't going down. And I think that the approach for suicide prevention almost everywhere has been to line up more ambulances at the bottom of the bridge and to, means restriction, it can be a part of it. But you're already behind the 8 ball if that's your suicide prevention strategy, right? If if you're waiting for people to get suicidal before you try to prevent their suicide, you're already almost too late. You need to move way further upstream in terms of basic skills.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of stuff will happen before suicide ideations. Right. Those suicide ideations, a lot of people don't realize they can be super spontaneous. Right? You can have a breakup and that get caught in that trap. And one day you're healthy and the next day you're attempting to take your life. People don't realize we're very fragile human beings. There's a really fine line. I've heard this old expression, we're 3 meals away from having a revolution. So most of us don't realize how much stress we're running around in a cup. So if your cup can hold a 10, let's say 10 inches of water in it, for example. And a lot of people are walking around with their cup with 9.5 inches. They don't have a lot of room for stuff.
This is so true.
They start bubbling over.
I had Silken Laumann on the show, the Olympic rower, who she was functionally disabled by a horrifying injury 10 weeks before an Olympic competition.
Oh, wow.
For which she recovered and was able to compete and won bronze. And I asked her, did that teach her resilience? And her response was that no, that she already probably had those resiliency skills coming into that accident, and that's what helped her. And I think that generally speaking, needs to be the case, that your cup is going to fill up. It's going to overflow sometimes. So then how do you respond to that breakup?
Well, that's the key. I see that's where I think we're missing the boat. Right. Resiliency is not an outcome. You hear people go, like, if you said to them, Marco, tell me what resiliency is, they'll say pushing through or moving through setbacks. That's talking about an outcome. That's not telling you what resiliency is. Resiliency is not static. The American Psychological Association says it's a trainable skill. Resiliency is something you do intentional. So, for example, if I want to build my cardiovascular capability, I get on a Stairmaster or run, jog. I know that I'm building my heart capacity, my VO2 max, my cardiovascular is helping me get in shape. When you start talking about people around resiliency, well, yes, exercise is probably one of the best things you can do for your mental health. It's really good. That and sleep, do those two things really well, and eat healthy, and don't drink a lot, and stay away from drugs. Those are probably good parameters. But the other thing that people don't realize is that what we also can do for resiliency with intention is, make time for your social connections. Show up. Do some volunteerism, give help. We know that people who help other people and acknowledge other people are healthier and happier people. You know that. It's not just about getting, it's about doing.
Right. Something that I've noticed in the mental health community over the last few years, that sometimes it's a difficult message to deliver that people's mental health is partly in their, and I think a big part of it, in their control. Because I think sometimes, especially when people are symptomatic, when they're actively struggling, they interpret that as being blamed for their illness, that they haven't done enough to stay mentally healthy. How do we get around that? Because I think what you're saying is true. You can't just live your life however you want and do every unhealthy thing and expect to continue being healthy. So how then do you, I guess it comes back to that question about insight. How do you get around that barrier of saying, no, I'm not blaming you for your illness, but you can actually do things to drive your recovery?
The person, when you ask that question, it jumps in my head, is Dr. William Glasser's work in choice theory. He was one of the early theorists that I looked at, and I became a faculty member of his in California, started studying. I remember him telling us a story one time, and it's worth sharing because it's relevant. He was working with the Veterans Affairs and working at a psych hospital. And he said one time he's watching people, and he was using, back then with apropos, used the word crazy, which we don't, but gallows humor, said people were behaving not appropriately, and they were acting out. And he said, well, I'm going to take a line. He took a line, and he said, and took all the video games, and not video games, they wouldn't have that back then, the pool table and ping pong, whatever the heck they had back in the 60s. And he basically said, no crazy behavior past this point. And he noticed the people who were really, really ill were able to actually change their behavior because the need to want to be able to play a game or socialize on the other side was more powerful than the behaviors. So he started to come up with this concept around it, and he looked at Rotter's original work in the 50s around locus control. And I think that's what people need to learn, is that we don't teach people about locus control. And the challenge is that when we're caught over in our emotional part of our brain, it's getting the support so that you can help get up to here. So as a cognitive behavioral therapist, I don't do magic. I just help a person move from their emotional brain to here.
Right, to their more cognitive
controlling brain. Then start teaching them how they can get self-control, and teach them locus control, teach them that they can take control of their own life. Now, saying it and doing it are two different constructs. Because we got to remember, Mark, when people come to my office, they're normally not happy.
Right. Sure. They don't come to you when they're doing great.
Yeah. Right? They're usually really, really emotional.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we need to help them move through their emotions because they're real. They need to hear their emotions so they know they're heard. They need to go through their own process. But the point is that I say to people, I do talks the same as you, and when I do my keynotes, I actually ask employers, because they're usually the ones sponsoring me, who owns mental health, the employer or the employee? And the right answer is the employee owns it. The employer can support it and facilitate it.
Right.
And that's the message we need to start getting. And you're right, because that whole thing, when you get over here, when you're already scared and you don't know what to do, you can feel helpless.
Well, and this speaks to, I want to come back to accommodation, which you mentioned, but There's this old idea in developmental psychology and learning theory around this idea of the zone of proximal development, where you are, basically there's a bubble around you, and you can do so much so much change within that little bubble, and that anything outside of it is probably going to lead to failure to increasing degrees. So if we can identify where the person is, take small enough steps within that bubble, then you can move the bubble up gradually.
And we have to educate them that failure is a part of the process.
Exactly, and that's just information that tells us, well, maybe we stretch too far, but we can manage our goal a little bit closer. So to come back to accommodation then, you mentioned that when you were in college and this professor acknowledged that you might have been struggling. What were the kind of changes or accommodations? Well, first of all, what were you struggling with, and what were the kind of changes or accommodations that professor helped you to identify?
So I couldn't write, and I had difficulty reading. So I was reading probably a sub-grade 8 level, and being dyslexic, I couldn't put together sentences. And I've written over 60 books and 300 plus yards.
Sorry, did you say 60 books?
Yeah, over 60 books and over 300, 400 or 500 articles, whatever it is. And I need an editor all the time to show the reference. So I'm not cured of that. Neurological issues are neurological issues. But I will tell you that one thing they did for me is I got oral exams. I got one-on-one tutoring. I got other people's notes. I got a study partner. I got the support of Landmark East, was down the school. They taught people with dyslexia different strategies. So I was given tools.
And did this flexibility on behalf of your teachers, presumably it helped you, but it also met their needs too, right?
Absolutely, because what happens is that, it was not an IQ issue with me, right? I mean, I have 8 degrees. I mean, it's nothing to do with IQ. It was all to do with processing, and I processed the world different. And Dr. Don Little, and he sticks in my head, and he said to me, I'll never forget, he said to me, he's head of special education. He said to me, Bill, something important you need to understand. He said, for the rest of your life, you'll have an editor. Okay, now move on. Now go do your work.
Acceptance and change. This idea that this is just a reality.
It's just like the same thing as if you're a person and you have lost your leg. You learn how to accommodate and you can go ski. It's getting understanding and not resisting and being. And what happens, I don't know, I'd be interested in your reaction. Someone asked me, Bill, why did that accommodation work that day for me? Why did that change my life? And I said, well, when you have a good mentor, you need to be ready and and I was vulnerable. And I was ready to accept help. And I think that sometimes we have to realize is that not everyone's going to be ready the first time.
Right.
We want to keep rolling the buses and let them know you're there. Because part of the challenge is we spend too much time talking at people versus just talking with them and being there and allowing them to have that. And that professor, without me realizing, Mark, she kind of baited me for 2 weeks. She probably knew in the first day or two, but she built rapport. She was nice to me. She said hello, asked me how I was doing, how did I find my courses. I felt comfortable with her.
And you're more likely to listen to somebody and take the advice of somebody that you trust and feel comfortable with.
Yeah, so and I think that's sometimes what we forget sometimes is that the messenger is important, but the person who's receiving it, I believe they need to be ready for it too. The concept around mental health and mental illness, I believe this conversation, I think arguably we're just at the front end of the curve. I think this conversation is just about starting. If you think by 2030, the World Economic Forum predicts that this will be the #1 cause of premature death on the planet. It's right now almost estimated about $2.4 trillion global problem on its way to $6 trillion by 2030.
That's leading drivers, depression in particular, of disability leave as well.
And so I think what we have to realize is, I do the same things. We talk to a lot of senior people, the two of us, and I think to them, I say, without mental health, you have nothing. That's one of the reasons why, Mark, I don't actually promote mental health strategies anymore.
Interesting.
What I focus now is on the employee experience. What's the gap between the employee experience? Because the reality is, you tell me, and you're a smart guy, and you're very analytical, so I listen to you, is what isn't mental health? So, for example, through the employee's life cycle, when they walk in the building, is it flexible? Do I feel good about my pay? Do I like the people I work with? My training and my development? All the different courses programmed, but it's the entire employee experience. And what employers can do if they want to make it really simple, how do they reduce mental injuries and harms? And how do they promote mental health? Well, it's not complicated if you actually just put it in a very simple framework. I'm a pretty simple guy. Is that I, as an employer, what are the things that add charge, positive to the culture, and what is adding negativity? and I have control of removing things and barriers. And instead of hallucinating in my room, because I used to be as chief of staff, so I used to laugh at this kind of stuff. Like the CEO goes, go make X number of dollars by Friday. And I used to laugh and go, yes, I'll just do my rain dance, pixie dance, and we'll get that thing going. We'll get another $2 million by Friday. Yeah. The reality is it has to happen through your people.
Right.
And what employers need to do more, I think surveying and all that stuff is really good. You do it with precision and make sure that you understand the analytics. We just got to spend more time going out and talking to our people.
Yeah. So that's one of those positives then that you're mentioning in terms of shaping the culture. What are some of the negatives that you think workplaces need to take out of their culture?
They need to actually, the illusion around work demand, and I call it the illusion, is because we sometimes, if you're a young person, I sometimes will tell you to do A, B, and C and leave you to your own devices. But I don't tell you, by the way, don't do it in the evenings, don't do it on the weekends, don't be emailing me.
And you're sending emails at 2 a.m,
right?
Just checking in.
So what we can do is how work is being managed.
Right.
We need to get better at it.
Right.
We need to also be aware, start paying more attention. When are employees plugging in and unplugging? So if they start thinking about work at 6 a.m. and stop thinking about 11 at night, I don't care if they get into work at 9 to 4. That's not, because what's happening is that's impacting their quality of their life, how people work blend. So I think big thing is how we're managing work, the manager-employee relationship. We need to put more emphasis on that. We continue to promote people because they're subject matter experts. We don't even ask them if they like human beings.
Right, or if they have any management skills whatsoever and they're becoming a manager.
But just let's make it really simple.
Just like people.
You like people.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Right. And if you don't like people, what the hell are you doing?
So
right?
then what do you say to an employer who says, yeah, but they deliver, they bring in the money, they bring in, right, they're good for the bottom line.
Well, what's happening at what cost?
Right.
Because what happens is you think about over the last 10 years, and start thinking about, people need to start looking. I read Simon's book, The Infinite Game, the other day, and I'm thinking
Simon
about
Sinek,
it. Yeah, and I'm thinking about it. He's right, because a lot of people are playing. I mean, because it seems that what I got out of that book was really the juxtaposition between the finite and the infinite, and realizing, being a guy that I understand this and you understand this, is I will never arrive and say, Mark, I'm now healthy.
Right.
I know every bloody day for the rest of my life. I'm going to have good days. I'm going to have bad days.
Sure.
And there is no perfection.
And that's the human condition, though.
Yeah. but isn't, I got to ask you, though, about that. I mean, I'll finish my thought, though, because my ADHD kicked in, is that the infinite game employers need to understand is that mental health is not going to go away. We've been talking about physical health for 100 years.
Sure.
Throw in a couple $100,000 to train my managers and do AAP and do a couple of things and say, Bob's your uncle, we checked out. You got to forget that. What you need to do is stop getting into programming and policies and start focusing on behavior and experience and focus on the employee experience and realize it's a part of business. And employers start to take the long game and think, because the last frontier is our human capital. We've done the IT, we've done the process engineering. The last resource that matters, that will predict business successes of people. And if you look at the last 10 years and look at businesses, isn't it interesting how the average life cycle of a business now is? Is that 80 and 90% of them after they're gone within 10 years?
So do you think then that safeguarding the mental health of their employees will eventually just become a competitive, I guess, will the evolution of it mean that people who don't do that are going to be
I'll flip it. You do this all the time, Mark. Without mental health, what do you have?
Right.
Nothing. And so the reality is us thinking that this is just something that people like Mark, who tells a story about jumping off a bridge, and Bill, who talk. No, it's everybody.
Yeah.
And what we have to start doing is realizing this is a universal thing, just like oxygen. And if we can start taking it really serious and creating a place where people want to be, a good question for you to ask employers, say, what percent of your employees come to work because they want to? What percent come because they have to? And if you say 50-50, is that good enough? So the question is ultimately, when you start thinking and when you're being strategic, I think we become too tactical. I think there's an app for this and there's this. Oh, we're going to give you a brand new app. That's going to change your life. It's not going to change everybody's life. It might help somebody. So I believe in online cognitive behavioral therapy. I think is great for some people.
Sure.
I think meditation, for example, is great for some people. I think what we have to do is start realizing is people's experience of totality, and that all of us have the same existential crisis.
Yeah.
It's about how do we feel in our own skin.
Right. So how do we help people then to, given the vast amount of diversity between people, everybody brings something else to the table.
Yeah.
How do we help them, or how do we shorten the period of time it takes from struggle to getting whatever resources might be that works to them? You know, we use this analogy of darts and a dartboard all the time when it comes to medication and mental health.
Yeah.
But it's true with therapists too. You can encounter one therapist and it might not be a fit at all.
No.
But then so many people just leave out therapy isn't for me. No, that therapist isn't for you. That's a different thing.
So I think that's the key part of this. Like I try to use a little model, Mark. I use awareness, accountability, action. So I think to your point is what do we need when someone has a challenge, whatever their challenge is, become aware of where they fit on that continuum and what it means, and be clear that there's help. And actually understand that. Then move to accountability and okay, so now what's my responsibility? Like when we had a daughter went for open heart surgery 8 months, we decided to become kind of very knowledgeable about heart surgery. So we started to wonder what was that going to be like and what her recovery, what would we do, how do we offset infection? We had to become smart. And a part of your accountability is to start ask questions and learn. And I think one of the things about therapists, I'm so glad you said it, it's therapy works when there's a trusted relationship. Period. The end. And most forms of therapy work more or less the same, with a bit of an advantage for CBT. But and depending, I mean, CBT is okay. I mean, I like it. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, but there's other techniques that are out there that are there. And then I think that last part is action, is setting expectations. I think the big one we have. It's kind of like, you know, I went to my doctor and I'm 56 years old and I went through my physical. So you got young guys that don't work. So I put a bunch of weight on. I had my doctor say, oh, Bill, you got to lose all this weight. And I realized I said to myself, okay, how much do I have to lose? And she said, oh, 45 pounds, 50. I go, really? I go, really? She goes, yeah, you know, you were a big guy. Like I was up when I played football, I was up pretty heavy. So I slipped up to weight. I said, oh, okay. So, and then she goes, I go, how are you going to go about it? I said, 1 pound at a time. But I know what I'll do. I'll set my plan now, and I'll have it done within 12 months. Would that be okay? She said, perfect. And so my plan is I worked knowing that I just have to pay attention to what I'm doing every day. But I realized this time in my life, I'm not on a diet. I've actually realized it's lifestyle. Part of it is if you travel like you do and I do, and you take clients out, it's easy to eat and it's easy
hotels
to do
and
hotels and all that. So it's right now what I've done is I've created a routine that I, more vegetables, more exercise, more water, more green tea, not coffee, like little lifestyle micro decisions. And that's, I think why I'm saying that to you is that all of us have to realize is that we're all works in process.
Sure.
I make my living by helping people. But sometimes I have to look in my mirror too. The same as you, is we need to step back and go, wow, how much am I living what I'm teaching? And so it's continually looking at and realizing that. And then I guess as I get older, I realize I don't have to be perfect. And then I realized, oh my God, no one's perfect. And then the big epiphany hit me, I don't know if this one hit you, is that holy moly, where there's suffering, on the other side of suffering is happiness.
Right.
And I'm starting to really realize that we've not actually helped people understand that suffering's a part of being a human being.
It is, and that, the darkness makes the light so much brighter.
Yeah.
You appreciate it so much more.
Yeah, and I think that's what my big learning has been the last few years. I'm starting to realize is that even my own life, when I've, had some health issues and that, and I got a brain tumor when I was 50. Yeah, and it was a carcinoma. It wasn't killing me, but woke me up to realize how fallible we are as human beings, the stress of having brain surgery and going in MRIs and all that kind of stuff. And I thank God haven't had brain surgery yet, but I have to go every year to find out if I need brain surgery. And what I realized is that I can get really worked up about things, but I'm starting to realize is that I can only control where I put my focus.
Yeah.
And I can only control what I decide to teach myself.
Right.
And if I don't know, there's a whole bunch of people out there that are so excited about wanting to help me.
Yeah. And this is, I think, the case too to bring it back to workplaces. Yeah. Lots of companies, managers, CEOs, they say they don't know where to start. It's a great idea because they've heard all this high level awareness about mental health in the workplace. Yeah. But it's this, the national standard for psychological health and safety in the workplace. It's such a big thing. Where do I start? Well, start where you are and, make a plan.
Well, it's funny you say that. I'm the chair of the National Standard on Impairment, who's going to be, and I'm on the oversight that oversees that CSA. And when I was looking at it the other day, someone said, Bill, where do you start?
Yeah.
They said to me, where do you start? And I said, one, say it's important and continue to say it's important and keep asking questions if what we're doing is working. That's your job, senior leader. Say it's important and keep asking questions, not just to the people. Ask every Betty and Sue and
make it a priority. Just like your micro decisions and changes, it has to be a priority.
Then get a really good baseline. And don't assume that you're not doing a lot of things that are good.
Yeah, you probably already are.
You are.
Right?
But find out what's working. But I find, here's one of the challenges, and you probably notice this too. You go to organizations that are fairly progressive, and they go, yeah, we have 35 programs. And here's what I say. Good. I'm just curious, when are employees given permission to use your programs?
Yeah.
When do they use your programs?
Right.
And how often do they use them?
Yeah, and then their EAP access is single digits. Then nobody's using the services they have.
Yeah, because they actually don't know what the value benefit is to them because we haven't, and by the other thing we haven't done either, we haven't even taught people how to do behavioral change.
Right.
So we say we're going to do change all the time, but I know when we go to organizations, like for example, I do a behavioral-based program called Impact, and we'll take 15 organizations on a journey for 2 years at a time, and they'll come together and we'll create that collaborative team, and we're very behavioral focused on how we get from A to B. Now, after doing this for so long, and I realized is that these solutions, the part of the challenge, what frustrated me, it costs a lot of money to hire someone like me or you to go into an organization. So I wanted to create the SaaS model for how to do this to drive price way, way, way down to make it accessible to everybody. And what I'm learning, the more we're doing it, the more we're learning and doing it, there's very specific behaviors that if you just focus on a few things and do them well and keep going back to that well, you don't have to make this complicated. And one of the biggest things that I find a lot of people don't understand is how when they're going to actually do anything, is that there's a part where they have, if they think about they have 100 employees, and there's 4 things that are going to happen. One is that the employees are going to have some expectation of when you say you're going to do something of what that looks like. And that expectation will impact their perception. Their perception will impact their experience, and their experience will impact their reality of how it's working for them. And the expectation gap, we don't often check. So we're too busy throwing pizzas out the window versus taking a group of employees, say to them, hey, Mark, today we're going to teach everyone how to wear black shirts like you are. And this is what we're going to do, and this is why we think it's a benefit. Do a little focus group like a Nelson does. Does this language make sense? Does it sound silly to you? Make sense? Okay. Tell me what we think we're going to do. Get them on board. Say, okay, great. So we're going to go launch this to 50 people and learn how to do it. And once we learn how to do it, you're going to tell us and coach us, how do we actually make sure it's working? What are the metrics of success? Here's what the employer thinks metrics of success is. What do you think it is for an employee? You just spend a little bit more time defining what you're trying to do, then you can start scaling things.
Getting people on board, yeah. And I don't think yet, because I mean the national standard and this kind of formalized movement in workplaces towards psychological health and safety is still relatively new. I don't think they've mapped it on yet to the change management type process that they've already been training and spending millions and millions of dollars on, right?
Absolutely.
It's no different.
And the other thing too, I would say to you, Mark, is I'm thinking, I guess, how do I put this politically correct? This is a wicked problem.
Yeah.
And no one has an answer.
Right.
I think we all have a point of view that are in the field. I certainly have a point of view. You have a point of view. I think we need a point in time for employers to come to them with humility and basically talk with them and say, this is our experience of what we think works. Let's try these things and get evidence that works in your culture. Because I'm finding what I'm getting a little bit concerned is as this becomes a little bit more professionalized, it's becoming a little bit too prescriptive for me. And where we're coming and say, thou shall do, you do this, and you do that, and you do this, and you'll do this.
Right.
Well, I look at the outcomes, health outcomes, and the health outcomes aren't, you can go to 4 different organizations, do the same thing. We haven't yet got what I call scale and replicability yet,
right.
Where we can replicate something over and over and say, in other words, pat your elbow 12 times, pat your head 5, and then your belly 4. That will get you going, brother, sister. That we don't have that yet in mental health yet.
Nor will we, I think, because
that's the point.
Again, everybody's different. And if we get to this place where where people aren't doing the deep learning of what needs to be done, in other words, they're taking the prescription, whatever it is, and then actually applying it to themselves, that deep learning beyond just the didactic, then it's never going to take root. They have to be able to internalize
and we have to create that experience for the employees.
Right.
And I think so again, you basically said, I think earlier in this call, correct me if I'm wrong in our talk, is that, where do people learn these things?
Yeah.
We're not teaching people how to be healthy, happy human beings.
Right.
And what we're not doing is we're not actually making that a part of our criterion. What we're doing is we're categorizing people as strong or weak.
Right.
I don't believe that. And I know it for a fact because I've done this work for so long. I've seen some of the most strongest first responders you'll ever see. I was a first responder in shore search and rescue with the Coast Guard. And you see stuff. Everyone has a breaking point, right? I've seen people that are stress load, being super, super stressed on Wall Street, really, really top bankers, just walk out the door because they can't take it anymore. I think we all have to understand that nobody is immune from this. And what we have to, I believe, is not scare people with this. It's just say, hey, this is something we have an ability to develop. And I guess my challenge I'll ask you to think about when you're doing this work with people is that it's going to be yeoman's work to keep this conversation going. It's going to be really, really hard because what's going to happen is you're going to go to CEOs. And they're right now in Toronto, you wouldn't find with, civic action, all these great things. Lots of people are talking about it. I've been privileged with the Globe. They allow me to put articles out on this, and you get to do this. But what's going to happen if the results don't come? People are going to go, hey, what if we don't do it?
Right, it'll run out of gas.
Run out of gas. But we have to actually set the expectation as a flat or 1% micro changes of what we need to do. And the reality is if we don't do this, there's things that are changing. Population health is changing. Culturally, millennials and the Z generation, they're different than my generation. It's like I didn't even know I was allowed to have a point of view. Right? I was a point and go person.
Right.
And wait till I was 40, and maybe if I was lucky, I would get something. I'd be successful at 40.
Yeah, once you have a job and a house and a marriage and all that stuff.
Then I get to be the manager or something.
Right,
You don't become a manager in your 20s. What are you talking about?
Right.
Or your 30s, right? Or you don't get that. And so I think what happens is societal there's shifts. We're dealing with much more inclusion now.
Yeah.
And much more. I think it's just going to be yeoman's work to keep this going. I just hope we can get enough evidence for senior people to know that it's the right thing to do. It's good for their business, and we need to keep this going.
What's the most compelling argument for you? We got to wrap up soon, but what's the most compelling argument for you that this is the right thing to do, that companies should focus on the mental health of their employees?
I actually, it's interesting you say that. Because of Wall Street, I think what jumps in my head is because I'm used to thinking about it from the basic human capital productivity piece of it. It can save organizations a tremendous amount of cost, but more importantly, it actually can allow them so much more productivity. In other words, creativity. And that energy that actually drives organization. So the fabric of the organization is based, because again, as I said, without mental health, you're not going to have to be your full potential. You're going to have like a battery, it can be 100% charged or 10%. Then I go across the other thing is that is the productivity angle. I think the experience angle around people who feel valuable, connected to what they're doing, gives them purpose. Then when they leave work, they have purpose and they can take that to their community. I think employers have a really good opportunity to actually help inoculate people, to help them to want to go back and contribute to their community, do volunteerism, engage. And then I think the other part about it is really, it's besides being the right thing to do, my sense is that whole concept around health, around your mental health will actually mitigate your risk for chronic disease. It'll mitigate your risk for addiction. It'll mitigate your risk from all the other things we talk about, like loneliness and suicide and all those. So it's from a very much of a preventive thing because I don't know if we have enough good, healthy human beings to do all the things that we need, is because you continue to hear that it's harder and harder to get talent. Well, I think that's the last frontier. Is not just trying to get them in the door, but creating experience for them that they actually can, be the best version of themselves, and then teach other people how to do that.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you for bringing people to that frontier, for pushing that frontier forward
thanks for
in the work that
Mark.
you can do. Where can people find you and what you're working on?
Okay, so I'm a chief of research at the Conference Board of Canada. We do all kinds of stuff across Canada in the area of workforce productivity. So they can find us through the Conference Board. I also have a company called Howatt HR. We do a lot of work around employee experience. We take organizations through journeys of how to do this. We have all kinds of tools and processes. What I kind of get to my point now, what I'm really doing is I'm becoming a coach's coach, if you will. I'm trying to replicate what I know, and I'm trying to scale it so that people can actually have experiences that I believe that employers can actually have.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
That's it. That's my conversation with Dr. Bill Howatt, the Chief of Research for Workforce Productivity for the Conference Board of Canada and the President of Howatt HR Consulting. Go check out Bill's other work. His articles that he writes that you heard us talk about for the Globe and Mail are incredibly insightful and practically helpful, which is what I like most about it. We mentioned in the conversation there how often companies, whether it's the CEO and the leaders and the bosses and managers, or even just the rank and file everyday employees, they often don't know how to actually implement significant change and meaningful change in their workplace with respect to mental health. But Dr. Bill gives lots of really practical advice in his columns and in the other work that he does, so I suggest you go check that out. While you're there on the internet checking out Bill Howatt, head over to Apple Podcasts if this is where you're listening today. Subscribe to the show, leave us a star rating, leave some comments. We'd really appreciate some more comments. If you scroll down to the bottom of the podcast there, I do read them and I love them. If you want to share the show as well, tag me on social media. It's at Mark Hennick. That's at MarkHenick. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, everywhere else. So feel free to give me your thoughts on the show and any other guests that you think that we should have as well. The podcast isn't only available on Apple Podcasts, it's also available everywhere else. So Google Podcasts and Spotify, Stitcher, Libsyn, iHeartRadio, everywhere else. So wherever you get your podcasts, you can get So-Called Normal. I want to thank everybody at E1 for making this show happen, for my great editor as well, Dave, for assembling these. None of this would be possible without them. And it especially wouldn't be possible without you listening to the show and listening to me prattle on and having conversations, which I'm really interested in. And I can tell from the feedback that you are too. So thanks for supporting the show. We'll catch you next time on So-Called Normal.